tonight we're going to talk about something really important, Joe, and that is overcoming relationship reluctance. So let's start there. And why don't you tell me why you chose this topic, first of all?
Well, I think it's an important topic because things have changed in the relationship world in recent years. And I think it's important that we stay on top of the changes and maybe know what to do as a result of them. So that's, I think, the main reason. It's a good topic.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your thoughts or your view on how you think things have changed in the relationship world. What are some things that you feel have changed?
Well, I think in the past, it used to be that when this is, predominantly, I'm going to speak more about men getting out of relationships because I know your audience is mostly women. But I think that in the past, when a lot of times when men got out of relationships and they were considering entering into a new relationship, oftentimes they were coming out of whether it's a loveless or a sexless or just a basic unhappy relationship. And so, they're a little reluctant to take that plunge again and maybe end up in the same boat. And I think that reluctance has been around for many years. But we're seeing a couple of things now that we didn't see years ago. And one is sexual FOMO, the fear of missing out. So, you're just inundated daily. If you're online, if if you're surfing the web, there's all kinds of opportunities out there, supposedly, for relationships that are, less restrictive and no commitment and just go out and have fun. And, to a lot of guys who haven't been in great relationships, that sounds really appealing, and they're understandably reluctant to, get quote unquote tied down again in a similar relationship to what they've left. So that's something that I think is fairly recent. And also there is an abundance of evidence and studies that show that, monogamy may not be all that natural. And so, people are starting to hear more and more about this, and then it makes them wonder, well, then is monogamy really for me? Now, by the same token, most of us want a long-term connected relationship. I mean, I think that's what the vast majority of us are searching for. But we've got to figure out a way to get over the reluctance that I think, we're having to deal with, especially for those who have been in relationships before and not successfully.
Yeah, well, and I think this is a really important topic too, Joe, because I think there's already a perception in the minds of many women that there's a lot of men that are resistant to commitment, to monogamy anyway, even before we even start talking about these other layers that you're talking about. And then if there are these other layers like the sexual FOMO that you mentioned, and at least it gives the impression to a man perhaps that he could have all of these other opportunities.
Whether or not it's true. And it probably isn't in a lot of cases, but still,
right.
You can dream, right? And that dreaming of something maybe more exciting than you're used to in a relationship is, likely going to keep you from wanting to jump right into another one.
And especially if he's come out of a relationship that didn't offer what he was hoping it would offer, or maybe he's been left financially damaged, emotionally damaged from a past relationship or marriage, right? There's all that, right?
And I think the chances of any number of those things are really good, because let's face it, we don't get the best education on how to have a good relationship. So there are many relationships that even if they don't end up in financial ruin, you still, oftentimes it's very challenging to really do relationships successfully, right? We haven't been taught how.
No, we haven't.
So I think it's probably more common that you would end a relationship and come out feeling one of those things that you mentioned, whether it was, discouraged or, uh, financially penalized or emotionally distraught,
Mm-hmm. So if we have all of these things going on, and if many men are going to be, maybe we'll say the word gun shy as a result of that, what can we do? What can we do? Because most of the women in this audience, I know, are wanting that long-term, committed partnership, monogamous relationship. I talk to
Sure.
women from this audience every day, and that's the hope and dream for the vast majority of them.
And I think it's possible to find a guy and show him that having that kind of relationship that still maintains a lot of excitement, that's a real possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And so how to do that? One is to, as soon as possible, have a dialogue about relationship and what each other's views are and what your past experiences have been, so we can see what you're faced with now in terms of relationship reluctance, right? And I think that's the most important thing is starting that dialogue about where do you stand in a relationship? What are your goals? What are you looking for?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one big thing. And the other is, I think it's up to women who want this kind of relationship to make it fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have got to do, if they're just going to try to rope a guy into a typical relationship and then burden him with a bunch of expectations, it's probably not going to work. So we have to be really creative now. We have to design a relationship that, gets a guy in and keeps him excited because of what you guys are doing together in relationship, the communication, the sex, the exploration. I think all of those things are really important.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. There's so much here that I would like to at least touch on with you. It's interesting. Every time I do one of these interview series, Joe, there tend to be like kind of themes that kind of appear. And one of the themes that's appearing in this series of interviews is the importance of having shared values. And part of that is kind of like, what is your vision for your life? Like, what kind of lifestyle do you want to lead? And part of that would have to do with what's your vision for relationship, for partnership. Because if you have one person that wants to kind of live the freewheeling single lifestyle and another person wants the committed lifestyle, you got a big problem.
Yeah. And knowing that going in, I think, can make a big difference, whether or not you try to pursue that relationship or whether you say, oh, I can see right up front, after this discussion that we're just really not well matched for each other.
So another thing, Joe, that really caught my attention was when you said the word expectations. And I think this is really, really important because whether or not we know it or not, or whether or not sometimes we even know what they are, we all come into relationships or partnerships with certain expectations, which is kind of humorous and kind of funny, because if we don't even know what our own expectations are, and yet we have them, we sometimes still get upset and frustrated when this potential partner or partner doesn't automatically know what they are.
Absolutely. Expectations are so important that in our first book, we devoted a whole chapter to them and how they can damage a relationship. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody likes to operate under somebody else's expectations.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't naturally. And so, we really have to look at what expectations we have. And I think it's a great exercise. And then see if we really need to hold on to those expectations and what would happen if we let go of that. Would our partner get a little bit more breathing room as a result?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes we don't even know what those expectations are until we find ourselves feeling disappointed that an expectation wasn't fulfilled, right?
Exactly, right. That's one way to find out, yeah.
That's one way.
After the fact. Oh, yeah, I must have had an expectation about that. I mean, pretty much anytime you get disappointed, you probably had some expectation.
Exactly. So That's still an opportunity, though, to explore whether or not that's an expectation worth holding on to, or if it might be something that your partner might even be able to provide if you were able to make a clear request.
Or just to even say, hey, I noticed that I have this expectation and I want to talk to you about it and see, how it sits with you and what we can do about it. If there's a way I can get rid of it, all the better. And there's something about incorporating your partner in that discussion instead of just going off and trying to work on it on your own. That it's vulnerable, and I think that there's something very connecting about a conversation, that revolves around expectations.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So going along with expectations, and these kind of go hand in hand here, are making assumptions. And what you were talking about earlier on in our conversation about having conversations about relationship and partnership and how this potential partner sees themselves or sees their potential for a relationship and what that would look like, can help get rid of some of that stuff, some of these assumptions. Because one of the things that I've found in working with women over the years is that they'll find themselves at a place in a relationship where they assumed that the guy was in the same place as them. And to their surprise, they find out that is not the case.
Right. And I think that's just indicative of the lack of communication and conversations that we typically have in relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have the conversations or the communication, that leaves you only with assumptions, pretty much. And so, Molly and I have been together now for 16 years. And when we met, it was online. And the first question that she asked me was about relationships. And our conversation about relationships has never even slowed down in 16 years. And a lot of it is because we do write about relationships. But what we found through the process is that the very best thing for our relationships is to continue to discuss what makes a relationship great, right? And it's hard to imagine Molly making any assumptions like the ones you just mentioned, because we have so much communication all the time that, if there was any bit that she didn't know, she'd just ask me, right? Is this a false assumption that I have of you? I can't even imagine her asking, because we talk about so much stuff. There's so little left to that's unknown.
Right. I think it feels really scary to a lot of people to have these kind of conversations, especially earlier on in a relationship, though.
I would agree. You don't want to let the relationship go too long, right? Without being vulnerable and authentic and sharing yourself. I think in a lot of ways, it's better to know sooner than later if that relationship is going to work. If your partner is going to be able to receive your whatever your vulnerability is, right? And I would say to those women who are afraid is that more often than not, what you're going to find is that the guy's very receptive and very caring and is glad to know what it is that you're thinking, right? And it helps, it produces a level of intimacy that you wouldn't have otherwise. And that's what we're all trying to strive for. Maybe not the guys so much, they don't know it, but trust me, guys want the intimacy, even if they would never want to admit to it, right? They're still, and they wouldn't maybe think they're looking for it, but once they have it, it's like they really appreciate it and want it. So.
I'm glad you said that, because I think sometimes women question that, like how important it is to men to have intimacy. And I'm not just talking about sex, but I'm talking about that emotional connection and emotional intimacy as well.
Well, men are having to get over being raised, oftentimes in a masculine way, right? You've got to, big boys don't cry, and you don't want to show your emotions. That's weak, and so they've got all these things to overcome. But in the presence of a couple, it's a lot easier to do, right? They can be vulnerable, they can be intimate with you. And once you get them in the habit of doing that, they're typically much more receptive and honestly relieved in a lot of cases that they have this safe space to be vulnerable and to be intimate and to be authentic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that in interviewing so many men over the last few years, one message that's come through to me is that a lot of men are so starving for a place to really be able to safely express their feelings, their emotions, kind of those more vulnerable parts to themselves, because I think men don't always get a lot of that kind of support from the world
Right.
at large, if you will. I think the way men have described it to me is that it's like out there in the world for men, it's a pretty competitive world, and they may get the "hey dude, slap on the back" kind of thing, but they're not necessarily getting a lot of really good reinforcement or a lot of compliments. They don't necessarily talk to their buddies like women might talk to their female friends. So there
Right.
may not be a lot of opportunity for that outside of a partnership kind of relationship.
Yeah, I would agree. And so on one hand, you've got men who are brought up in many cases not to show emotion and not to be vulnerable and not to be intimate. And then on the other hand, you've got a lot of women who make the assumption that men don't want that, right? That's a real
Mhm.
problem. So I think women have to let go of that assumption and realize that everybody craves a level of intimacy. I just think that it's easier for women, right? There's not as many blocks to intimacy for women because of the way they've been raised. So if the women could let go of the assumption that the guy didn't want to have that, and just make the assumption that he did, right? I think they would find that men would be very receptive in many cases.
Mhm. So just to kind of like, come full circle here, part of what you're recommending, and I totally resonate with this, is having the conversations perhaps earlier on, being willing to be courageous and real and authentic, and not being afraid of finding out something that you might not want to know, because chances are you might find out something you do want to know. And either way, it's going to be better because you're going to be building on a foundation of truth.
Absolutely. I think you've said it very well. And honestly, I think the sooner the better.
Hmm.
Um, right. So if it's not the right guy, okay, great. Nice to meet you. I'm moving on.
So you said when you first met Molly, that one of the first questions she asked you was about relationships. Is that
Yes,
correct? Did I catch that correctly?
it is. Yeah.
So you model it for us to tell us kind of what that might sound like. Can I put you on
Well,
this?
I mean, I can tell you exactly how it went with us. And I don't know if we probably mentioned this to you before, but we met on Craigslist.
Yeah.
And I was looking for a relationship. And so it was my post that she was reading and responding to. And the only thing that she asked me was, "Oh, I was just curious how your search for a relationship is going." And I was so intrigued by that, right? She didn't come back with, "I'm so and so, and I'm 5 foot such, and I have red hair, and this and that, and I do this for a living, and I live over here." None of that, right? And that one question was so intriguing to me that I pretty much forgot everything else I was doing, online, and started focusing on that conversation that developed out of that one question.
Mm-hmm.
That has been fascinating to both of us ever since, and it is
Mm-hmm.
literally nonstop. Not a day goes by when we're not exploring something new about relationships or having some conversation about relationships.
So your post kind of came right out and said you were looking for a relationship. So, and then she's asking you, how's your search for a relationship going?
Right. And it just made, it probably made me crazy at the time. It's like, what? Don't you want and know any, don't you want to meet me? She was very clever, right? She was very clever.
Right.
So she got me talking. As she even says, had I just said, "Oh, it's going okay," that would have probably been it. But my response, I think I went into a little bit of detail about it, and that's what led into this relationship and 16 years of amazing relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, so just to be clear, I think one of the reasons that women don't feel comfortable or they might be hesitant is a better way to say it, to have these kind of conversations initially, is they don't want to, come on too strong or scare the guy off or whatever. But I think if you are just exploring, questions around relationships in general, and maybe talking a little bit about, what you envision for your life, meaning an individual woman, like,
right.
In a place in my life where I really think, yeah, if I meet the right person, I could have a really great committed relationship. I'm ready for that now in my life. I don't think that's going to send too many guys heading off screaming into the trees.
No, because it's not a direct question like
You're not saying, what are your intentions with me?
Right, exactly. To get up and go away right now?
Exactly. I'm the guy's going, I was just trying to decide what kind of coffee I was going to order.
Right.
So having just some exploratory questions and just, sharing what's true for you and just kind of bouncing these ideas off of each other to see if you're kind of a match.
You get a great sense very quickly, right? Because you delve into something below the surface right away. At least we did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a long time before we even exchanged pictures or talked about what we did, where we lived. Well, maybe we probably would have talked about that because at some point we wanted to see each other. But yeah, it was not the typical things that got our relationship started. It was the under the surface conversation that really sparked this relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and also just to kind of come full circle, another thing that you talked about, Joe, was making the relationship fun and keeping the relationship fun. So again, that I think stands out as being something really, really important, because if you're living this great, fun, joyful life, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to get on that happy train, right?
Absolutely. And if you show a new partner some fun, he's going to want to stay around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Molly's always said, and I at first didn't agree with her, but I think I've come around now and now I do agree with her. And that is that women oftentimes are more creative. Mm-hmm. So they can think of, in our relationship, Molly comes up with 90% of the fun things that we do. And I jump in with both feet and I have a blast and we both have a great time, but she does the majority of the initiating. Mm-hmm. And, some people might say, well, if we're in this relationship, I should only have to do it 50% of the time. You should have to do it 50%. Well, then we'd probably only have 60% as much fun because she'd do her 50% and I'd still do my 10. Mm-hmm. So she's like, no, I want to have 100% fun. I'm going to do as much as I can. And, and I'm totally happy with that. So I think at least in our relationship, I'm a little bit more of the grounded, rock, and she's the creative genius, with these ideas overflowing. And for us, it's a great balance because mm-hmm. we have that stability. I think that groundedness that I bring, and her amazing and crazy ideas that keep us, going and excited. So.
Yeah, and I think another reason this is really great too, Joe, is that I think a lot of men are a little more cerebral. They're in their heads. They're not always connected as much with their feelings. Doesn't mean they don't have feelings, but they're not always there. They're oftentimes in their head. And this is what I've found to be true with my husband and I. He's in his head, but I think I help him, and I think a woman has the capacity of helping him connect to his emotions, to his feelings. And part of that can be connecting to his feeling of just going to have fun, just for the sake of having fun, and giving him a break from being in his head. Because my husband's this really intelligent, smart guy. He's an attorney, he's a CPA, but he still needs to.
He's trying to keep it all together up here, right?
Right.
His fun is probably not the first thing he thinks about, right?
No.
So it's great that you take that on, right? If we recognize, hey, that's not really my partner's strength, but it is mine.
Right.
So, he has other strengths that I don't have. I'll take on the creating the fun in our relationship, and we'll both have a great time.
Right. And, it's like we set up this system, which I may have told you about before, where, for a birthday or an anniversary or Valentine's Day or whatever special event might be coming up, I will just say, what I think would be super fun to do for our anniversary this year would be to go to such and such, such and such. And then I'll even sometimes say, can you make the reservations and set that up? And then he gets credit for doing it.
Right.
I get to do what I wanted to do. And it's like this win-win, instead of me sitting there thinking, oh, I bet you he's not going to plan anything for our anniversary, right?
You're very wise, Michelle.
That's no fun.
Yeah, I think that's great, right? You're recognizing what his strengths and weaknesses are, and you're, filling that role of, hey, if I could, just put the idea out there, he'll make it happen, and we'll both have a great time. I think that's really wise.
Yeah, so I would say we have kind of a similar arrangement that you and Molly have, in the sense that maybe he keeps me a little bit more grounded because I'm always off with all my big ideas and creativity, and I think everything and anything is possible, right?
Right.
But it's like he's like the foundation underneath all of my big dreams, kind of thing, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So it can work together. So that's also kind of something kind of cool to keep in mind, is that sometimes you don't have to have the same strengths. And in fact, sometimes it's really a great blend when you're different in some of these respects.
Oh, we think it's really important to be different in a lot of respects, right? Because then you have there's a lot that your partner can teach you, right? They may have different hobbies, different desires, and if they're different than yours, you can invite them to show you what they're all about.
Yeah.
And expand your relationship and your experiences.
Yeah. I think relationships are one of the greatest opportunities for growth, personal growth, discovery. I mean, there's so much to be gained from that. And you're right, you can learn a lot from your partner. And so it's a great opportunity that way. So Joe, I know that I could chat with you. I always love chatting with you. I really like the things we've talked about today, because I think they're really keys to what might sometimes feel frustrating to women when they sense there might be a little bit of reluctance, or they might not sense that men are ready to jump in with both feet, because it empowers women to know that with the right guy, there's something you can do about it. There's something that might make that whole idea of loving partnership, monogamous relationship really attractive.
Absolutely. It's definitely possible. We've proven it.
Yeah, exactly. You and Molly have proven it. Myself and my husband have proven it.
Right.
Joe, I really want to thank you. It's always so much fun to connect with you. And I just really, really appreciate and like you and Molly so much. You're such sweeties and so cute together and so inspiring. And you're like walking, talking examples of the things we talk about on these events. So I really, really love having you contribute.
Well, thank you. It's really been fun. And I hope your listeners and your viewers get something positive out of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.